Welcome to the April chapter meeting of Wild Ones River City. Our program for tonight is titled Native Garden Design, which will be presented by two of our members, Amy Heilman and Rebecca Marquardt. I am Marty MacArthur, president of Wild Ones River City chapter. I like to begin our meetings with the Wild Ones mission statement, which is shared by all Wild Ones chapters. Our mission statement is to promote environmentally sound landscaping practices, to preserve biodiversity through the preservation, restoration, and the establishment of native plant communities. Our motto is healing the earth 1 yard at a time. Tonight, before the presentation begins, I have a few items of chapter business to share with you. This past week, I participated in a meeting with the National Wild Ones Board. It was interesting, and since it was on Zoom, officers from many of the chapters from not only Michigan, but Wisconsin, Kentucky, Iowa, and Ohio were able to participate. The leadership of the National Board is focusing on the importance of communication with the chapters and supporting each chapter in our growing organization. I learned from that discussion that during this past year, the membership in Wild Ones on a national level has increased by over 500 new members since November. Wild Ones now has 60 chapters with 5 seedling chapters that will be working together towards official chapter status. As new chapters join, it means that native plants are becoming more abundant in individual landscapes, and the lives of insects, pollinators, butterflies, and birds are being supported in more beautiful and interesting landscapes throughout the country. We welcome you to our meetings and hope that you will want to join us with your membership. Your membership helps good things happen in our community and also supports our local chapter. Information for joining is on our website, rivercitywildones.org. Coming up in May, our chapter meeting will be on May 17th and is titled Cultivating Our Schoolyards as Habitats to Grow Scholars Who Will Become Stewards. Our presenter will be Sally Triant of Grow Wise Learning. This will be a virtual meeting. And then our chapter meeting on June 21st will also be virtual. This program will be presented by Shelley Stusek of the Northwest Invasive Species Network and is entitled Go Beyond Beauty. In July, we will have the Wild Ones River City plant sale on Wednesday, July 21st. The following 2 Wednesdays after that, July 28th and August 4th, we will have garden walkabouts. A walkabout is like an open house in a garden. Specific information about the walkabouts will be in the July and August e-news and on our website. This means that for 3 weeks in a row, you can participate in a Wild Ones activity, either purchasing plants or enjoying the experience of seeing gardens where they are growing. We have some exciting events to look forward to this summer. A little more about the plant sale. The plant sale will be in a new place this year, new location. It will take place at the Fulton Street Farmers Market in Grand Rapids. We will be ordering online as we did last year. If you are a member, you will be able to order during the last week of June, and then ordering will be open to the general public for the first 2 weeks of July until the 14th. Pickup will be at the Fulton Street Farmers Market in the evening on Wednesday, July 21st from 6 to 8 p.m. In June, on 2 different days, we will be partnering with growers from the Native Plant Guild at the Fulton Street Farmers Market. While the growers sell plants, we will be providing information about our organization and the importance of growing native plants in our landscapes. Information about the dates will be in the June e-news and on the website. Are you ready to get out of the house, even if it means that you would voluntarily be pulling garlic mustard? If so, write down May 8th, Amon Park, 10 o'clock to 2 on your calendar. Amon Park is full of spring ephemerals, but garlic mustard is a problem there, and your help would be greatly appreciated. Check the website under events for more information. I would like to thank member Sherry Brom for writing the recap of both the March and tonight's meeting for the e-news. We appreciate you stepping up and volunteering, Sherry. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting, and I hope to see you soon. Now, Ginny Wanty from the Program Committee will introduce our speakers for this program.
Thank you, Marty. Welcome to all. Just a couple housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. The chat box is down at below screen for comments, and there's already a resource link put in there. So keep an eye on the chat box throughout the program. Please use the Q&A box for your questions, and the speakers will have some time at the end to answer. There will be a poll during the presentation that will have 3 questions. And as a reminder, all attendees will get an email next Wednesday that contains a link to the recording of tonight's presentation, a link to resources that the speakers provided, as well as a short survey. So it's my pleasure to introduce the 2 speakers this evening. Rebecca Marquardt is our first speaker, and she has over 20 years of experience as a landscape architect with an emphasis on ecological restoration. Rebecca has spent most of her 20 years in the Great Lakes region and grew up being surrounded by oak savanna landscapes. Conservationist Aldo Leopold and pioneer native plant designer Jensen provided an important foundation for her work. Rebecca regularly provides instructions in sustainable landscape practices, and her company, Revery, specializes in ecological landscape design and plant-based education. Our second speaker tonight is Amy Heilman. Amy has been designing and implementing gardens for 20 years. Additionally, Amy taught the native plant section in the MSU Extension Master Naturalist Program, as well as served as past president of River City Wildlands. Amy's business, The Living Garden, specializes in creating habitat gardens that function and beauty using native plant species. Her goal is to encourage homeowners to take an active role in the planning and care of their gardens, and to use those spaces to learn about the natural world and the web of life. Without further ado, the wonderful and fantastic Rebecca Marquardt and Amy Heilman.
Hi there, thanks for being here tonight. As Ginny mentioned, I am a member of Wild Ones River City and am sitting on the programs committee. One of the people that we can thank this evening for coming up with this program topic is Ginny Wanty, who introduced us. She ran the MSU Master Naturalist Program for many years, so she surely knows what she's talking about. We thank Ginny for introducing us.
Hi, I'm Amy Heilman, and I am now the current Garden Committee Chair for our River City Wild Ones chapter, and I'm just delighted that we have so much interest in this program tonight. So sit back, get a cup of tea, and enjoy this wonderful presentation. I'll take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. We're turning off our video so you can focus on the contents of our presentation. We will be talking about creating your own native garden design. The national chapter of Wild Ones developed this guide with a grant from Stanley Smith Horticultural Trust. In it, you will find the step-by-step directions from choosing native plants, creating your garden plan, working your plan, and keeping it beautiful. In addition to this, part of the grant and member-funded endeavor included the recruitment of 6 professional landscape designers to take a fairly typical residential site and design it using only native plants. Even if you are not a member of Wild Ones, by going to the website we will have linked throughout the program, you may see a total of 7, soon to be 8, different designs for 7 different cities or 8 different cities. Amy and I are honored to help maximize your understanding of this truly incredible resource and hopefully inspire you to create your own native garden design. Native plants are strikingly beautiful and are essential to wildlife. You may be drawn to the colors of a flower in bloom, like this swamp milkweed we see being visited by a great black wasp. I know I watch and am mesmerized by those gorgeous iridescent blue wings. Maybe you've seen a pairing of 2 plants that seem to weave an incredibly beautiful tapestry, like the way this white wild indigo in a sea of blue spiderwort does. Tracking a bumblebee float from one pollen-drenched stamen to another maybe is what you call entertainment too. Or perhaps you get excited in the way the Monarda fistulosa or bee balm flower changes throughout the seasons, from that funky lavender star-like bloom to those lollipop seed heads in a winter sky at sunset, like the picture I took at the top right from the place Amy and I are presenting at, Wittenbach-Wegge Center in Lowell. Maybe Echinacea rocks your world. First, when in bloom, you smell that orange, fragrant center and are rewarded by watching finches break this dried seed head apart to get the tasty seed inside. And watching snow collect on the spiky brown seed head all winter long brings you great joy. Whether it be aesthetics, personal satisfaction, and mental health, or fostering wildlife, native plants offer immeasurable benefits to all of us. But the greatest of these has to do with relationships. Your landscape choices can have huge impact on the ecology of where you live. Ecology is the relationship between living organisms and their surroundings. The significance of native plants is that they begin the food web by converting the sun's energy to grow and become food for consumers. Essential species like oaks provide food to hundreds of different species of caterpillars that are the crucial sustenance for many birds. Native plants and animals have adapted for thousands of years alongside each other. Many are so specialized that they cannot survive without this partnership. When we garden or design entire landscapes using native plants, we are actually building relationships more than anything else. This crucial ecological function is what gets disrupted so that we can have farms to feed us, roads to drive on, homes to live in, etc. Remember Joni Mitchell's song about paving paradise so we can put up some parking lots? You're probably here because you want to help build some of that paradise back into the places you love. So let's get started. Get to know and choose native plants. Thinking about Michigan, we know that there are very different habitats, from dunes to wetlands and forests, and even some prairies here and there. This colorful map in the center shows us there are different areas throughout the Great Lakes states that have different soil types, topography, and environmental conditions, where in the last 10 to 12,000 years, with the retreat of glaciers, different plants adapted, established, and serve a function, whether as erosion control on a slope, food and shelter for wildlife, or to intercept rainfall so that it can infiltrate the ground. We have so many native plants to be able to garden with No matter what your site conditions are, there is a wide variety from which to choose. Since I am an outsider from Wisconsin, I can say with some certainty, Michigan natural resources are absolutely astounding. Moving from a place like Denver, like my family and I did, to West Michigan, and seeing so little development by comparison to Denver, and then to explore the natural areas throughout this wonderful state as we go camping, I have never lived someplace with so much ecological diversity, which can be both overwhelming and intimidating. Then add in that I am supposed to know all about plants for the kind of profession I am in. For my landscape architecture program in the 90s, we only ever used native plants for design because we were also nestled in the restoration ecology department. So when I set about trying to get acquainted with the educational resources here, I soon discovered they too are quite complex. We can understand how many species are native to a given county by searching the Michigan Flora site from the University of Michigan. That herbarium with botanical collections of plant species is one of the oldest in the country. They must be the experts on all things native plants, right? Well, what about Michigan State University? Like all of the land grant schools, they have a mission to educate the public about the research they are doing through their extension services, like Master Gardener and Master Naturalist. So it makes sense that even the entomology department at MSU, who might typically be focused on insects, wants to share with the world all about the native plants that the precious pollinators need to survive. Another resource out of MSU is the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, as seen at the top of this slide. I have spent more time on their website than any other in my entire life. Did you know you can see what kind of plant community would have historically been in the area where you live? It is astounding, the amount of research that must go into tracking not only the historical information, but the up-to-date information about the natural communities in this exceptionally beautiful and diverse state. Then there's Calvin University in our own backyard for those of us in the Grand Rapids area. Dr. Dave Warners is quite literally healing the landscape of the Plaster Creek watershed, one rain garden at a time. See all those numbers of different plant species by the University of Michigan's herbarium? Could you even imagine there are over 500 different kinds of wildflowers here? The Plaster Creek Stewards is likely experimenting with sedges, grasses, and wildflowers like no other institution in the Great Lakes region, and maybe even the country. They are the boots on the ground in ecological restoration and watershed protection. Then there's all the other nonprofit organizations doing conservation work all over here. We can learn by actually lending a hand, working alongside botanists and ecological restorationists to better understand what is native and what is invasive. So that leads us to some important questions we have for you. Please respond to the questions in this poll. Such as, how would you rate your knowledge about native plants on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is, I know very little. Middle, 5, I know the native plants in my own garden very well, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. And 10 would be, I am an expert botanist. Please take your time. This is really for an interesting understanding of who our audience is tonight, but also it may have long-term benefits for us to know these answers. Next question. In what ways have you learned about native plants? Please check all that apply. As we said, there are so many amazing resources and opportunities to learn. We're curious how you've learned. And the last question, please respond. Are you interested in learning more about native plants? In the chat, we would love to hear how you learn best. Please provide that if you're comfortable. We'll give it another 30 seconds. Yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and end this poll because we hope that everyone's had a chance to finish their responses. Thank you very much for taking the time to fill this out for us. It's really quite a lovely opportunity to hear what some of the responses are. So thank you. We will share the results of this poll towards the end of the program. For now, let's continue.
So one of your slides.
There we go. Okay. All right, let's continue. We're going to be talking about creating your garden plan. There are 15 points. Dealing with design basics may seem like a lot, but this list should serve as a good and comprehensive guide as you think about your landscape. But before we get into design basics, let's talk about what comes first. If anything comes to mind and you're interested, go ahead and write in the chat. What do you think what do you think you do before you even begin creating your garden plan? Everyone is motivated by different reasons to improve ecological function of their yard. Is it that presentation you watched last month here at Wild Ones that with Curtis Dykstra, you talked about creating bird habitat? What about, was it the month before when we heard naturalist and professional photographer Craig Elston talk about, he gave us that botanical tour around Michigan, and you learned that there are 11 different kinds of milkweeds here? Maybe you saw that gorgeous pictures, some of the gorgeous pictures he shared, and you thought, I want to have, as my goal is to have as many different wildflower species as I can. I heard that in Kent County, there are 550 known native wildflower species. I only have 10 right now in my yard. I have a lot of work to do. Or you can go visit gardens to draw some inspiration. Like this beautiful pictures we're seeing here. Thank you, courtesy to Jeanette Henderson at Calvin University Ecosystem Preserve and Native Gardens. These are exquisite photographs, and the gardens and plaza there are just about to be burst into life this spring. Was it all the native bees you saw dancing around the variety of blooms? Maybe that monarch butterfly or the hummingbird clearwing moth that you were watching while you visited there last summer on the Liatris really was inspirational to you. Be sure and capture what was it about those gardens that you experienced. Was it peaceful and relaxing? Those all can contribute to the kinds of inspiration you might want to think about creating in your garden. You could even start a Howe's idea book, such as this one, with images of garden styles you like or features you might want to include in your landscape. You can also find sources of inspiration at Pinterest and start some boards there. Naming the things you liked about these places will help you try to achieve the same in yours. When you are ready to create your garden plan, the very first and extremely important step is to study your site and make a map or diagram. This drawing detailing the existing site conditions is the very same for all 7 designs you can see at the website for Wild Ones Native Garden Design. Within the compilation of native garden designs, you will find drawings, project descriptions, and photographs. The Wild Ones mission is to educate, outreach, and provide resources to anyone interested in creating ecological gardens. And that is really exemplified in this whole effort. We hope that after tonight, you will have an easier time looking over this resource because you will have a better understanding of the site conditions. And we also hope that you will be inspired by the way these designers combined different species of plants. There just might be an idea for you that would work perfectly in your garden. And bear in mind, with those seven different cities, each of those designers has a different style. Some you will find were very formal, and others, like the ones we'll be talking about tonight, are more naturalistic. For your yard, creating a diagram or drawing can just simply be sketching the property lines, the outline of the buildings, sketching in the paths or driveway. Using a printout of your property as seen in Google Maps is just fine. This existing site conditions drawing helps us understand the sunlight levels and soil conditions, especially what kind of soil there is, sand, loam, or clay. You can think of your yard in this very same way. Do you have compaction or erosion or poor drainage? Other things to think about is your existing vegetation. And drawing that or writing that down on your existing condition site will help you understand the problems you may have in your yard. The designers of the Milwaukee and Minneapolis examples both chose to consider plant communities as their design strategy, seeing these spaces as individual gardens. Notice at the top left of the drawing on the left, the honey locust has dappled light and clay soil. Then look at the drawing on the right. They're going to use woodland species. And on the top right of the drawing of existing conditions, we see there's a low spot that gets seasonally wet during heavy rains and has dense clay soil. This is the perfect location for the wet or mesic prairie species. How exciting! Some of our most ecologically productive gardens are those very conditions. We see the colorful design, the drawing of the right, and the photos. This designer chose swamp milkweed, blazing star, boneset, and some wonderful sedges. Amy will show us in just a moment what the Minneapolis designer decided to do with this space. They are very different solutions. Let's look back at the existing site conditions drawing. At the bottom left or southwest side of the property, see it says dry, hot conditions with intense sun exposure. Ooh, but it also says the soil is house construction backfill and very rocky. But guess what? That means it will drain fast. So anything we put there needs to be more xeriscape or drought tolerant. What did they choose? Let's look back on the right. Oh, perfect. The plant community is called for dry prairie. That's exactly what this site wants. As possible, the best kind of practice is to work with the soil you have and to choose the right plant for the right place. It's better to not amend your soil. There are so many native plants for all kinds of soil types. Our advice is almost always really get to know what kind of soil you have, then select your plants. The entire drawing and project description that Carmen Simone designed from Minneapolis put together really is very well organized. Her design is a series of gardens that responds to these site conditions. Even from this zoomed out perspective, you should be able to distinguish the lawn, planting beds, stepping stones, and the flow of how you might experience this yard. Imagine going from front to back. The images to accompany the design are helpful to see the palette of plants used for the different gardens. We've arranged the plants here in a way to hopefully convey an important point. Prairie savanna plant species are for generally full sun conditions or part sun. But within this plant community, you have species that favor different soil conditions. We can essentially consider 3 classifications of soil: dry, medium, and wet. But there are really 2 categories here: dry to medium, and the second, medium to wet. So there is a little overlap. Most of our yards have more than just one soil type, and there is always a bit of a spectrum of moisture levels. Native plants have some inherent flexibility, adaptation, and resiliency. Some years we have a lot of rain, and others we may experience more drought. The native plants adapted to this fluctuation. So our dry soils, which would be the sand, fast draining soils at the top of a hill or slope, is also a place where you would see drier conditions. Medium soils, those would include more of your typical garden loam, or rich in organic matter, maybe leaves have biodegraded and accumulated. And wet soils would include clay soils or areas that are low in the landscape. So thankfully, the places that we have to purchase native plants generally provide this information to us by identifying the soil types that different plants respond to. In this example, looking at the Kent Conservation District's plant list for their spring sale, we can see a column indicating soils. And in that column, you see M, D, W. D, if we have sandy soils or dry soils, let's highlight all the plants that can handle these dry conditions. What this does is it helps eliminate or narrow down some plant species for you to consider. This is a very helpful tool. We've also indicated the dates of their sale here, which we also have in our educational resources. Another very beneficial and helpful tool is the Calvin's plants list for their native garden. Please note this is for last year, and when they have the updated plant list, we will have that on our website as a link. But same thing, I've identified the soil again in the blue column. You can see the vast variety they've included and the depth of technical advice and categories that they've included here, which is really remarkable, and it stands to reason this is affiliated with a university like Calvin. And then also note the yellow column is for sun. Those 2 columns are the most important information that you can find and hone in on. When you start thinking about plants for your yard, be sure to look at that. And lastly, the last slide I'll be talking about is this image here. And this is a little bit of a compilation using some of the photographs, the plant palette that Carmen Simone put together for the prairie savanna species. Remember that front space, we talked about it being very dry. So you can see the species that she selected are all part of the prairie that can tolerate those dry to medium soil conditions. There's a lot of information in here, but please, when you're looking through these on your own, be sure and slowly look at what you're seeing. The plant legend includes the symbol of the plant that they've used. Here we can clearly see a lot of prairie dropseed was used in the front, and that's a wonderful choice for that space. Now I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Rebecca. I feel like I just went through a beautiful native garden with those slides. In this section of the program, I will go into a few more design strategies used in this Minneapolis plan. Then we'll touch on considerations when planting and follow-up care of a native garden. Let's focus now on the design of the backyard. People living in a neighborhood often take advantage of the more private space in their backyards to go a bit wilder than in the front yard. And that is somewhat the case here. Usually the backyards or the front yards are traditionally lawn and narrow foundation plantings. Generally, that's the expected norm. However, this is gradually changing as people are becoming more interested in downsizing their lawns and adding pollinator borders or planting their parkways. In this particular design, the large area of existing turf in the backyard was downsized by the development of foundation beds that were brought out from the house as far as 10 to 12 feet and up to 25 feet out from the back fence. So much larger planting beds than what we're typically used to using. These larger planting areas are beneficial for many reasons. They allow for the planting of larger shrub or tree species, larger groupings of perennials, an increased variety of species, less lawn to maintain, and more biodiversity overall, which is the goal for all of us who want to provide healthier, functional landscapes. Notice how the bed lines were created in a curving manner. They flow out and around the mature shade tree where grass usually does not grow well. This problem was solved by turning the area into a woodland garden of low maintenance ground covers like ferns, wild ginger, geraniums, and sedges. These can creep around surface roots that may exist and would have been difficult to mow over. I like how the bed lines curve gently around the deck too, and surround it with enough space for shrubs and perennials and an interesting patio tree. I think a Pagoda Dogwood was used here. It would be a nice choice for looking up in as you sit on the deck because it has an open horizontal branching. This design also includes several hardscape elements like stepping stone pathways, patios, and stone edging. Hardscape features like these help to define and frame the planted spaces and provide interest in the garden, even during times of the year when plants are dormant. The stone patio in the upper right corner makes a nice focal point from various perspectives and provides an interesting spot to sit and rest and be surrounded by the plantings. Another focal point is a small pond to the left of the deck. It's a little hard to see, but it's that blue dot. Habitat gardens should always include some form of water, whether it is a small fountain or even a bird bath. So along this back fence, the designer planned for the development of a hedgerow, a great example of how native plants provide function and beauty. Now, notice there are assorted trees, shrubs, and many different perennials gathered together in layers of vegetation. A hedgerow is a wonderful way to create privacy and screen views, downsize lawn, and provide habitat for birds and pollinators. The backbone of this habitat hedgerow consists of chokeberry, elderberry, pagoda dogwood, viburnum, and serviceberry. These species not only have a spring bloom, which provide pollen and nectar to attract pollinators, but also produce berries and seeds later in the year, an important food source for birds and other wildlife. As an added bonus, these native shrubs and trees display nice fall leaf color and provide winter structure. So they really are four-season species. You'll notice in the top corner here, there's a couple of websites that are very beneficial in finding out more about which species are best for which types of birds. So I recommend you take a look at those. A diversity of perennial flowers, also known as forbs, along with grasses and sedges, create the lower layer of the hedgerow, and the plant communities are divided into prairie species and woodland species, depending on the amount of sun and shade that area receives or the moisture content of the soil. We do not have time to go into all of the perennial species used here, 33 different ones as a matter of fact, but you can find them listed along with their photos at wildones.org under the Minneapolis design. They have different bloom times, so there is color and nectar in the garden throughout the seasons. Notice how they are planted in groupings, which will provide more visual impact, both to humans and for the pollinators to see from the air. You will see listed here a few good websites that can help you research each plant, which I pointed out earlier. We all love birds, but remember to keep in mind that plants we choose should also attract the insects the birds require for their food. The size and scope of this particular backyard may seem overwhelming, but it could easily be developed in phases over a period of a few years. In this plan, for example, you could establish the hedgerow trees and shrubs first, then later on, maybe add the perennial plant layer. Or plant one corner of the hedgerow one year and the other half another time. Completing one area at a time and getting it established will provide a sense of accomplishment, be easier on your time and budget, and make the project less intimidating. Remember to keep the fun in gardening with nature by exercising patience. This is another website that is called Native Plant Finder, and it's through the National Wildlife Federation's website. And it's a wonderful site where you can click in your zip code and it will bring up plants in your area and will know which ones are best for butterflies and moth as their host plant. It's a really great resource. By this point in our program, you may be feeling overwhelmed by all the information we have asked you to consider as you plan your native garden spaces, especially if you are new to working with native plant species. The key here is to move slowly and consider the following steps as you proceed. Rebecca pointed out the importance of knowing your site conditions and understanding the type of look you want. But how do you find out which plants to choose, what they will look like, or what fauna they support? Taking the time to do your research prior to planting will help you choose and purchase appropriate plants wisely. Here are some helpful books we recommend. There are many other books and references lists posted on our website. There are also educational videos and recordings of past webinars available to view, including this one we are presenting tonight. That should be available in a couple of days. And of course, becoming a member of the chapter gains you access to monthly speakers and field trips and the support of sharing plants and information with other like-minded people. Another important step is to identify and remove any invasive species you may have growing before beginning to plant. This is a crucial step for a successful garden. Shown here are a few of the worst invasive species in our area. Autumn olive, the top left, in the middle top, Oriental bittersweet, Japanese knotweed, garlic mustard, which is growing right now, and buckthorn. If your property has any of these and they are not removed, they will most likely invade and outcompete your native plantings. For a reasonable fee, Kent Conservation District employs a strike team that can come to your site to ID and safely remove them using appropriate methods for each species. Learning to identify invasive species is an aspect our Wild Ones chapter frequently will discuss, as it goes hand in hand with good land stewardship. So you have done your research, determined your plant communities, removed any invasive species, and are ready to plant. Now what? One question that is often asked is, how do I get rid of turf grass so I can create a planting bed? Here are a few methods. Stripping turf with a shovel is one way, but it is very labor intensive and not practical for larger areas. You can try solarizing the grass with black plastic during hot summer months, which eventually kills the grass, but it's not very attractive, and the intensified heat may actually destroy valuable soil microbes. Renting a sod stripper for large areas usually does a good job of removing thick turf, but it can be pricey to rent the machine and labor intensive to use. Plus, it requires the sod rolls to be moved somewhere. Some people choose to spray herbicides to kill grass, then plant through the dead turf. But do we really need more chemicals around our house? Smothering grass from oxygen and sunlight is the easiest method to eliminating grass, and there is no disturbance to the soil structure. It requires no herbicides, only light physical labor, very little money, and can do the work over winter months, so the site is ready for plants the next spring. This approach can be carried out in small sections around your yard over time, allowing you to phase in beds a bit at a time or extend existing beds to make them larger. Phasing in beds allows you to observe the development and growth patterns of the plants previously installed, which will help inform you what to do or not to do with the next bed. I cannot stress enough how important it is for new gardeners to proceed slowly in developing native beds. It is so tempting to take on large areas of a yard at a time because we've gotten used to instant results with traditional gardening methods. But the phasing approach tends to lead to more success and satisfaction with the results. So this slide here basically shows having 2 to 3 inches of compost spread over grass if your soil is poor. This step isn't necessary unless your soil is very poor. That will help or add organic material to your soil. And then layer your cardboard or several thicknesses of newspaper over that. Spread more compost thickly if you'd like, and then add 2 to 3 inches of shredded hardwood mulch. Some people like to use pine mulch as well. And then wait about 3 months and the cardboard will deteriorate, the grass will die, and that will add organic material back to the soil. And then you can just plant right through that mulch layer. As I mentioned, hardwood or pine mulch can be spread initially around the new plants to hold in moisture and decrease weed growth. But reapplying it each year is expensive and time consuming and not really sustainable. Consider planting spreading ground cover to act as a green mulch because they are perennial plants. They will return each year and they do a better job of preventing weed growth and they provide habitat as well. The 4 examples shown here are some of my favorites, but there are many low growing options to choose from. Using shredded leaves as mulch is also an ideal way of utilizing the resources that already exist on your property without having to bring in mulch each year. Fallen leaf material can be mowed over to shred it, then spread around your plants. If you have an abundance of leaves, create piles in hidden corners around your property that will slowly decay and can be used in the following years. Finding the native plant species you want is getting easier all the time. There are more native nurseries opening and several annual plant sales each year from various organizations like Calvin University, conservation districts, and of course our own River City chapter of Wild Ones, which will be holding their annual plant sale on July 21st of this year. And these pictures depict a few of our native growers and their abundance of native plugs that they are growing out for all our gardens. And the center picture is a past native plant sale at the Calvin University Ecosystem Preserve. You can find the sources of where to get plants and when the sales are happening under the resources tab of our website. It is updated often to reflect new information, so check it frequently so you do not miss opportunities to obtain plants. As I mentioned in a previous slide, how important phasing in garden beds is to keep from having your landscaping projects become too overwhelming. So this series of pictures shows just that. It's an example of a front yard planting that was developed in phases over a 4-year period. Photo 1 shows what the site looked like after a large area of invasive buckthorn was removed from a low area where water would accumulate during parts of the year. The home's downspouts were then extended out to feed into this low spot. Photo 2 shows where turf was eliminated as various beds were added or extended out from the existing one at the foundation of the home. Some existing non-native species were kept because they were in good condition, and a few others, favored by the owner, were added to provide color or screening. A few interesting landscape boulders were added too. In photo 3, a variety of moisture-loving native perennials were planted in the wet area, which now help to absorb occasional standing water. So it basically acts as a rain garden. In photo 4, the dry compacted area between the street and the sidewalk, typically referred to as the parkway, which was difficult to mow due to tree roots and patchy grass, was also planted in native species tough enough to thrive in those conditions. And they're a little difficult to see in picture 4, but right at the bottom of the picture, you can see the tops of some of those plants growing up in the parkway. No additions of soil were added to any of these beds, which were primarily clay, and no fertilizers were used. Now the site requires much less mowing and little watering except rain. The owner likes to add some colorful bulbs and annuals here and there for splashes of color. Now this site, which had little ecological activity, is visited by many different pollinators, birds, and butterflies. It is often said that native gardens are low maintenance, which is true in many ways. However, like any garden, some care must be taken to keep them looking their best. This lovely 3-year-old landscape can be found at Calvin University's Ecosystem Preserve and Native Gardens. Yes, it's only 3 years old. The first 3 years of a new planting require the most care, meaning occasional weeding and protection from deer or rabbit browsing. Once the plants have established roots and expanded in size, there will be less room for weeds to gain a foothold. However, weeds will grow in any garden and should be removed, but kneeling to pull them is time-consuming, physically difficult for many gardeners, and dislodges too much soil, creating an invitation for more weed seeds to germinate. These two types of hoes make the job easier. The Hula Hoe or stirrup hoe is designed to have a little play or wiggle in the blade so that it cuts at the correct angle on both backward and forward strokes. The shuffle or Dutch hoe has a stationary 2-sided blade that also cuts as you push it back and forth across weeds, cutting roots just below the soil. The soil knife is a favored tool of many gardeners. It cuts weeds and is used to dig holes for plugs. If you are going to plant a lot of plugs, shown in this bottom right picture, typically how a lot of our native plants come from our growers, if you're going to plant quite a few of those or even quart-sized plants, you might consider using a battery-operated power drill with an auger attachment, shown here in the top right. These augers can be found, and any of these tools usually can be found through a hardware store or online. So we've talked a little bit about weeding. Let's go into some watering issues. It is important to water new plants about 2 times per week the first growing season or so to establish their roots. By the 3rd year, they are typically established and can thrive on just receiving rain, but should be given some supplemental water in times of drought. Hand watering rather than depending on in-ground irrigation is preferred because you can manage the amount of water used and target it to the base of plants rather than watering the entire bed, which will only promote more weed growth. And really, native plants don't really want that much water and can tend to get rather leggy if they get too much water. Many people end up turning their inline irrigation off after their plants are established, so they save some water bill money. Many of us have been taught to think that cleaning up the garden in the fall is a good thing. However, in native gardens, leaving your grasses, flowers, and shrubs unpruned will protect the larvae of insects overwintering in the stems and leaves and provide seeds, berries, and cover for birds and other wildlife. Plus, snow-laden plants are really beautiful. So hold off on garden cleanup until later spring. Well, we are going to see the results of our poll here. Oh, here they just showed up. Let's take a look here. So So for the first question, how would you rate your knowledge about native plants on a scale from 1 to 10?
Let's see if we can scroll down.
Yeah.
Looks like the majority of people are falling into that 5
Yeah,
category.
about middle range. They know their plants in their own garden, but they still have a bit more they want to learn.
Let's look at the second
The
question.
second question, in what ways have you learned about native plants? Many are self-taught. Interesting. Hiking in natural areas with a botanist or native plant expert, which we do on some of our field trips and wild ones, and volunteering and stewardship work days in the community. That's wonderful. That's a great way to learn. And our Wild Ones programs. Third question, are you interested in learning more about native plants? In the chat box, 98% said yes. Wonderful. That's what Wild Ones is for.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that information will help us in future planning. This is a list of our calendar of events just coming up in the next few months through our Wild Ones chapter. We've got some garlic mustard pull at Amon Park on May 8th. Our speaker in May will be Sally Triant from Grow Wise Learning, Cultivating Our Schoolyards, Habitats to Grow Scholars. June, our Fulton Street Farmers Market. We're going to be selling some native plants for the first time this year at a few different dates in summer at the Fulton Street Farmers Market. So another opportunity to find the native plants that you want. And then our full sale will be July 21st. And then it mentions walkabouts, which are basically members in our chapter who have opened their gardens up on that particular day for a certain time period for our members, other Wild Ones members, to come in and view their gardens and ask questions and get some ideas. So that's a great perk for being a Wild Ones member.
Also, bear in mind that when we are at the Fulton Street Farmers Market for those plant sales, that is a collaboration with the Native Plant Guild. Amy and I are both members of the Native Plant Guild. It's for businesses in the field of native plants and design. But at those times, we will have the Wild Ones members, which Amy and I are both members, and the Native Plant Guild to provide plants for sale, but also educational material. That would be a great time to come and talk with us and ask your questions in person. We'd love to see you.
So keep track of our Wild Ones website to learn more about which dates those are going to happen.
And then I just wanted to mention at the February program we had that we mentioned about the Botanical Tour of Michigan, Craig Elston shared with us that he is going to be having these spring wildflower hikes. And this we included here because that is the kind of information we send out in our e-newsletter. So it's an incentive to become a member, to learn about special opportunities, like going on a hike to learn about these spring ephemerals. Notice that one coming up on Tuesday, the 11th, he's going to be talking about all kinds of woodland spring ephemerals. And then the following Thursday, the 13th, he is going to be talking about spring wildflowers and birds. And so these kinds of opportunities are great ways to learn. As some of you indicated, you enjoy learning that way.
In closing, we wanted to feature this beautiful piece of artwork, which was created by local artist Georgia Donovan and is available to purchase in poster form through our chapter. It will be available during our July 21st plant sale. It was also used as an informational sign in the native education garden our members created and continue to maintain. If you are interested in seeing a mature native garden as it looks in all seasons, visit this public garden at 920 Cherry Street in Grand Rapids. I also just wanted to mention too that all of you who have signed up to watch this presentation tonight will be emailed a list of all the website links we've mentioned, because there were many in this program. So it's hard to keep track of them, but you will be getting a list of those links, and they will also be posted to our website. Rebecca and I want to thank you for your interest in this topic and hope we have encouraged you to continue on your journey to becoming a native gardener. And now I think we have a few minutes to possibly answer some questions.
We have a few questions. I'm going to start with mine first, which is, would you two talk about some of your favorite plants that you think should be in everybody's native garden that you can't do without? Top of my list is a witch hazel. I plant one wherever I live. So do you have a favorite one or two that you would recommend?
Well, one I think is really underutilized is black elderberry. People often see it growing in kind of more moist areas, wet areas, but I actually have seen it growing in fairly dry conditions. And it gets beautiful, large, creamy flowers on it in June, and then those, transform into berries later in the fall, and the birds just gobble those up. And I just think it's a beautiful plant that can fit in a hedgerow or as a specimen. So that's one of my favorites.
Well, and Amy, I love elderberry too. This weekend I was planting these little baby elderberry I've got from one of our growers in the Native Plant Guild, Deb Montgomery. And I am determined to get a huge area of elderberry, because I like to harvest the flowers and make elderflower cordial out of it. If anyone's ever had a drink with Saint Germain in it, they know this beautiful tasting treat. But also, like Amy said, the berries. I actually have heard that, I thought Deb said that is becoming so popular sometimes that she sells out.
Oh, good to hear.
So that is a great plant. Gosh, Jenny, thanks for that question. We have a whole bunch of plants
We
that
could
we
talk
love.
all night about our favorite plants.
Yeah, and I'm a little reluctant to actually respond to that. What I would normally do is talk about amelanker or serviceberry, because they can be hard to find. And I don't want people to be encouraged to find something that would be difficult to locate. But serviceberry you see blooming, and I feel like this year I've seen more beautiful blooms than I've ever, and one actually in my own yard. Truly, this is a story of perseverance. We had Oriental bittersweet climbing up it, and it is on fire right now with blossoms. And I was watching little pollinators out there this weekend, and I saw the residual braiding of the invasive Oriental bittersweet on it. And almost like the flowers were saying, thank you for saving us. But yeah, no, we all of the ones that Georgia's featuring on her poster, I'm just looking at all these beautiful plants. I love the gentian. You see the bottle gentian on the bottom it's one of the interesting blue flowers. You don't have many native blue flowers, and that blooms later in the season, and bumblebees need to be able to get in there. And Vern Stevens oftentimes will put in a bottle gentian, this, in his rain garden mixed flat.
I got one from him.
It's like a surprise
I know.
every time. Like there's a song that says that. But anyway, there's all kinds of, the more you get to know, the more you get to love, it seems like.
One of the questions, which is kind of an interesting one, how would you describe the difference between the services you offer as landscapers between your two business? Is there a difference? I'm not sure there is really.
Well, generally, I'm a landscape designer, and landscape designers have a primary focus on planting plans and plants. Whereas architects also are focused on plants. Rebecca definitely is focused on plants more than many architects I've met, which is great. But then they also deal with more of the engineering facets.
Yeah, and for the standpoint of we both do residential design. In the past few years, have been doing more residential designs with a company called Enchanted Gardener, so that I do design and they install it. But I've also been working on some other projects that are not residential. And so that kind of has always been my focus, was not residential historically when I've practiced. And so I would say I do less with residential design, and I think Amy does more with residential
I tend
design.
to focus on residential design because there's such a great need in that area. I think all the education that our group and other organizations have done, stressing the importance of native plants, have really increased the demand for native gardens, and people are still needing to learn. So I do a lot of education with homeowners, but and I've done installation as well with my plans, but the demand has really increased so much in the last few years that I can't keep up with all the installation work. So this might be an opportunity for me to reach out to anybody out there who's interested in getting into the landscaping area, because we definitely need more help with the installation of our garden plants. So if anyone knows anybody out there that would like to get into that field, we would definitely like to work with them.
That's for sure.
This question was sent in by somebody when they registered. Any specific plants that have root systems especially helpful in filtering groundwater, roof gutter runoff before it enters our lake? So plants near shorelines.
Sedges and grasses are a great matrix to start with because they have a real fibrous root system. They kind of act like a sponge, and they'll help soak up that water, and then they also just mesh together to help hold in the soil from erosion.
But if you particularly have actual pollution that you're trying to prevent from going into a body of water, panicum or switchgrass can withstand some pretty nasty water. And so there is research about that in terms of, it's called remediation and phytoremediation, using plants to take up some of those pollutants. That's a great question, and it truly is still being researched. And my gosh, I have a project over on 44th Street, a corporate campus, and working with students. That's something if I could ask any interns out there, any college students out there who want a research project, I've got a project for you. And it's sometimes hard to find people who want to do research work, but what an opportunity to literally study what plants survive. Oh, I should say, Calvin, the Plaster Creek Stewards, they have been conducting research in which plants survive some of these very conditions that the question came from, you're asking about. So we all need to learn more about what they're doing and when they're ready to reveal the results. But they've been doing these rain gardens, curb cut rain gardens, for a number of years. And that's literally something that they are trying to track. So stay tuned.
I know we're basically talking mostly about plugs this evening, but do you have any comments? And I know on the Native Plant Guild, there are a couple folks that provide native plant seeds. Do you want to talk a second about the difference in starting a garden with seed versus plugs?
Well, I would say if you're a very patient person, then seeds are a way to go, especially if you have a large area. So many people now are wanting to convert portions of their lawns to prairies or meadows. And if it's a very large area, then seeds are generally the best way to go. But really prepping the soil is key to having a successfully seeded area. They really need to get any of the weeds out before any seeds go down. And it just takes could take up to 3 or 4 years sometimes for those seeds to actually produce blooms. So it's a different set of challenges with seeds than with plugs.
And if I would add to that, so our two seed purveyors in our native plant guild, Michigan Wildflower Farm and Native Connections, they are really remarkable. I myself am embarking on a little restoration effort, and it's challenging. It is so very challenging to properly prepare your site to add seed. That my advice would be, if you have the ability to hire someone to prep your site for you. And I do know that, there are some avenues of going about that. I know the Kent Conservation District, Amy mentioned that they can help with some of the site preparation, which, like it or not, oftentimes includes herbicide. And there is so much research about how you can do that safely, and that it, in the long term, oftentimes is a more ecologically sound practice. But prepping the site is just so utterly important. If you spend the money on the seed, you want to make sure that there is a great blank slate to start with.
The Michigan Wildflower Farm website has excellent information on the steps required to starting a large seeded area. So I recommend checking out their website, Michigan Wildflower Farm.
Yeah, it's a 10-step process. It's excellent. I will just piggyback on what Rebecca said, because someone put this in the chat box, that they decided to get rid of their lawn by using herbicide, and they used 3 times the strength, which of course was illegal because the label is the law, and they didn't really necessarily thought it worked well, and plus it killed more things than they wanted it to. But their comment was that the cardboard technique that you recommended really worked well for them.
Oh, yes, that's a great technique if you're going to do plugs. You do not use that technique for seeds, because you need to have the seeds make contact with bare soil. So if you tried to seed an area that was cardboarded and mulched, you wouldn't have very good luck with that. And I also just want to stress that if there is going to be herbicide being used for a project, I really recommend getting a licensed herbicide applicator, because they're trained in what herbicides are appropriate for specific plants at specific times of the year. So rather than, taking chances on figuring it out yourself, hire an expert.
Yep.
And that's true, because you all maybe know this, but you can go to any of the big box stores and you can buy this herbicide and that pesticide, and no one's stopping you. You walk out the door, you have an arsenal of chemicals, and no one is stopping you. So it can be very, very dangerous, and be cautious.
And to piggyback on the cardboard, another person asked, would clear plastic work as well for solarization as the black, or would it really should be black?
I found that it really should be black, because clear actually acts like a greenhouse, and it allows the sunlight to come in and allows the plants underneath it to continue to grow. So it's defeating the purpose of eradicating the plants underneath.
I did that terrible mistake in Colorado, which is the most sunny place you can be, and it was a greenhouse growing underneath this plastic. I was kind of embarrassed of myself for having done it, because it was just ridiculous.
Well, that's how we learn, though.
Yeah.
We all learn through trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
And someone asked, in terms of a ground cover, wild ginger, is it a fast or slow grower?
I'd consider it relatively moderately slow, not immediate.
I think the more water it gets, if it's in a moister area that's, stays slightly moist or wet, then it will grow a little faster than in a totally dry situation. But it's fairly adaptable in many types of soil and sun conditions, but not a real fast one.
Yeah. I was gifted some from a woman named Cheryl, and we did a barter where I gave her some pen sedge and she gave me some wild ginger. And just this year, it's really now coming into its own. And it took, took a few years to really do that. So I would say have patience. That's such a wonderful ground cover. But sometimes it's beneficial to plant it closer together to get it really established.
So there are a couple of questions related to deer. And it kind of makes me smile when I look at this because I think of how many classes I've gone on deer management. Any example of deer resistant native plants? And please don't laugh. And then the other question is, they have an ungroomed backyard, another participant at the edge of Plaster Creek. And she is hopeful that the native plants at the edge of the creek would be less desirable to the deer.
Well, deer will eat native plants. That's what they've evolved with. And there seems to be certain times of the year where they're more likely to nibble on them, especially evergreens in the winter. I've noticed I'm in a very deer populated area and I cannot keep an evergreen alive because they decide to eat them in the winter when they're hungry. But I think choosing plants that have a fragrance tends to, detract deer. Mountain mint is one of my favorites because it's also a great insect attractor. It doesn't spread it's not really a mint, but it's called mountain mint, and it's got a white bloom, and the deer do not touch that one. I don't see them touch false indigo, Joe Pye weed.
I've seen them eat Joe Pye.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know rattlesnake master, I feel like I've had good luck with that. Agasaki or anise hyssop. But yeah, Amy's the fragrant, even some of the allium, they'll avoid because it's like Amy said, it's got that fragrance and very strong taste.
Nodding wild onion.
Yeah. But
there are lists all over the internet on deer resistant native plants.
well, in sedges and ferns.
Yes.
I mean, in sedges,
For sure.
we learned from Bill Martinez at the Amon Park tour last year. Anyway, he talked about how sedges have, I think it's silicone in it. Silica, that is like what's related, how you make glass.
Yeah.
And so that is not favorable to the deer. So sedges, and we have so many, and ferns, if you have shaded area. Although sedges can be in the sun as well.
I would recommend, though, when planting new plants, new plugs, that you use some kind of deer resistant or rabbit deer repellent spray or pelletized product on them, because when they're new in the ground, it's like a buffet for the deer, and they will want to come and nibble. And if they pull them right out of the ground, then you have to keep going back and trying to replant them. So, but I found that if you use a repellent spray or pellet product on them, at least for the first 2 or 3 months, that will help a lot.
The wonderful Sally Treon is asking if we should rush out, and with the freeze frost coming tonight, should we be rushing out to cover certain native plants?
I know. What's the latest forecast? I don't even know. What's the latest? What's the lowest temp?
Oh, it's supposed to freeze tonight and tomorrow night, I believe.
26, 29, it's gonna be cold.
Yeah. If your plants have been in for a couple of years, they should be fairly hardy as it is. And I don't cover my native plants. They need to deal with it. And usually they do, because they've evolved with all these climate and temperature extremes that we have here in Michigan. And that's one of the beauties of planting native plants. You just lose very few native plants once they're in the ground. So if you've planted anything in the last month, then I would be covering that. But anything that's been in the ground for a while, at least a year or so, I think should be pretty good. And even if it does freeze on the surface, it will resprout 98% of the time.
I just uncovered, maybe I was saying about my ginger, my lovely patch of ginger. I've been slowly taking the leaves off, and I know there's still little friends that are still in cocoons living in those leaves. So I've been kind of nurturing that and figuring out where to put that in. But I literally this weekend on Sunday, I think it was, I raked my leaves, Sally, and put them onto a tarp because I wanted to give the ginger a little chance to breathe. I'm going to put those leaves right back on it tonight. Is it tonight that's supposed to get so low? Because I love the ginger flower so much that I don't want to jeopardize that. But even like our amelancher with that cold temperatures, it's gonna probably zap them. So would that mean it won't be able to set the fruit? I mean,
Possibly, yeah.
it's a good question,
Yeah,
Sally.
That's why it's best to not clean up your gardens
I know.
until, it's so tempting to do it in April and March when you want to get out there. But if you leave all the dead material around these plants until at least mid-May, that will help give them thermal cover to protect them from freezing. It's hard to do.
I know, and I only did it at one spot. But I'm just trying to,
I know.
yeah, absolutely.
So we have a number of questions about specific sites, like near the street, because they're subject to salt and auto fumes, recommendations for a steep hill. Are there some resources that you could provide to answer some of those kinds of questions that are coming out on Wednesday? Another one, which is the bane of my existence, Myrtle. She wondering if there's some sort of native plant that would keep Myrtle in check.
That's a tough one. It's also called vinca or periwinkle.
Mhm.
It's a tough one because it really escapes gardens and takes over in the woods and really doesn't allow much to grow through it. So we really discourage planting that anywhere near a woodland area. And it's difficult to eradicate. Repeated pulling can sometimes be successful, but it can take years. I think the best way to try to combat it is at least try to plant shrubs through it. I don't think most perennials will make it through vinca.
Right, exactly.
Even, maybe some ferns would, but shrubs have a better chance of, being able to compete with that heavy ground cover of vinca.
And some of it is like what Jesse Schulte talks to us about at the conservation district with invasive species, is sort of start at the edge and make sure it doesn't creep into your woods. If you have such a bad case of it, just do your best to protect the natural areas and then work your way in. Put those priorities around it not spreading any further. And then just like Amy said, just keep picking at it over the years. Salt is a big topic, and there are species that can withstand salt a little better, but it really depends on, are they using the salt on the sidewalk and they are determined to always do that? Would they maybe change the practices? So I guess, Ginny, as a response to that, I mean, I'd be happy to respond to that via email. If that makes any sense, and communicate with the person who asked the question, I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. That kind of sums up the 9 questions. I would give a little plug. You mentioned in your book resource 2 of the books written by Dr. Doug Tallamy, and he will be coming to speak live in Grand Rapids next June. So look forward to hearing more details and how you can hear, as I like to say, my version of Elvis, because I've heard him 11 times. So I look forward to him next June giving a great presentation.
Ginny, with that, I just want to add one thing. I brought this as a prop. Amy and I were talking about this. Oh, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see this
You can
book?
see Noah's Garden, yep.
Okay, by Sarah Stein. She wrote this in the early 90s, and that's when I read it, and I've been reading it ever since. It to me is, if I were to pick one book for inspiration about gardens and what you do in your yard, it would probably have to be this book. She had such a wonderful experience, and I think would relate to a lot of people in their journey. And then I have to at least say this week is April 21st, 1948, Aldo Leopold passed away at the age of 61. So during this week, especially, I would recommend that everyone go and read at least some of Aldo Leopold's book, Sand County Almanac. in just honor of him. He died, like I said, at age 61. That was far too young. So I feel like we are all his torch that we need to keep carrying on. So thank you so much for listening to us tonight. We appreciate this opportunity.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to the attendees as well as the speakers. We'll see you on May 17th for the program on cultivating our schoolyards as habitats to grow scholars who want to become stewards. Everybody have a wonderful night and thank you so much.